Oh, good morning. Oh, needed that cup of coffee, that last bit of coffee. Got a lot to talk about today, but I promise I won't talk as long as I did last week or two. Was it last week? Yeah, last week. Spoke for like a half hour. God. Don't want to do that again. At least I hope. Anyhow, got three movies I want to talk about. One of them is it's I saw this one this past week. It's not in the cinemas in Hong Kong, and it probably won't come to the cinemas in Hong Kong because I don't think Hong Kong people know who this guy was. But it is available on Amazon Prime and Apple iTunes. As far as I know, not Netflix, but yeah, Apple iTunes and Amazon Prime. And it really is worth checking out because it's one of my favorite documentaries from last year. And it's called "Won't You Be My Neighbor?" And it's about Mr. Rogers. It's about Fred Rogers, who created this show for kids and their parents back in the '60s, and became a cultural icon. Which you look at this guy and you think, how did that happen? But it happened. Um, so it's very interesting. So, um, it's funny. I am just a touch over the age when this show started. So I missed it. Like, I knew what it was, but I never watched it. The only time I ever watched it, if you can call it that, is when I was changing the channel. And we used to change channels this way back then, not this way. Um, and, I'd flip, and it was on uh, Channel 17 in Buffalo. It was on public broadcasting and Channel 17 in Buffalo. What was it? WNED, I think it's called, or it was called. I don't even know anymore. Um, and I would just catch a few seconds of it and go, okay, next. So I never really, I never, not even, I never watched the show, but I knew what it was, sort of, like just, and I think what I knew was basically the opening scene, won't you be my neighbor? And I think how I knew that was from Eddie Murphy's parody of him on TV Saturday Night Live in the late '70s. By the time I was a teenager, so I was familiar with the concept, but I never watched the show, and I had no idea what really went on after those first, that opening sequence where he took off, he came inside his house and took off his jacket and put on the zippered cardigan sweater and his blue running shoes, his blue sneakers, and that was it. That's all I knew. So this was really an eye opener for me. Now, this film, "Won't You Be My Neighbor," is directed by Morgan Neville, who won an Oscar for 20 Feet from Stardom, which I reviewed a few years back. Loved the film. I mean, amazing film. And he also did The Music of Strangers, the Yo-Yo Ma film, which I liked, but not as much. And Yo-Yo Ma is in this film, and apparently Yo-Yo Ma's son is the producer of this film. And I saw an interview that the son gave, can't remember his first name, where he said that when they were doing the Yo-Yo Ma film, it came out that Yo-Yo Ma was a guest on Mr. Rogers' show, and one thing led to the other. So that's how this film got made. One sec. So now about Mr. Rogers. Fred Rogers is his real name. He was ordained as a Presbyterian minister. I think back in the probably in the 50s, and he saw that his calling would be through the then young medium of television. For young kids, hard to believe, we didn't have television before the 50s, and I never saw color television until the 60s. So in Canada, we didn't even have color television broadcasting until 1966. I think young kids can't get their heads around that one. Um, so he felt that the programming on TV that was for kids, it was not good. It was usually slapstick, pies in the face, or you look at Bugs Bunny, which I loved and still do, and or Roadrunner, with Wile E. Coyote getting blown up all the time. He thought it was violent, and he didn't like that. Now I think if he would see the cartoons on TV today for kids, I'm not talking about The Simpsons or anything or The Family Guy. I'm talking about the cartoons for kids. Um, they're far more violent than Bugs Bunny was. So I think he'd be pretty disgusted with what he sees today about the cartoons. So he began writing and performing for children's shows in the Pittsburgh area, which is where he's from. He was from. And in 1962, he got his first show in Canada called Mr. Rogers, one word, Mr. Rogers. You know, I vaguely remember it. Again, I didn't watch it, but I vaguely remember it. And so he was on Canadian television for a couple of years doing Mr. Rogers, and then he went back to Pittsburgh in the mid '60s, and the show became Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, being Mr. Rogers being one word, and then later it separated into two words, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and it ran on first it ran on regional public television, and then it went national in 1968, and it ran till 2001. So he was on for like 33 years in America, and then plus 3 years or so in Canada. So he was on TV for a long time. He basically spoke to a generation and a half of kids. Amazing, you know. Now, the one thing, probably because I never watched the show, he was about as uncool as any grown-up could be. He had, as I said, he's got his trademark cardigan zipper, his blue sneakers, rather nerdy-looking guy, and a very gentle speaking manner. He spoke very quietly, very measured in his tone, and he spoke to kids in a language that they understand. And this was really to his credit. He knew how to speak to kids, and that's what made him so successful. But unfortunately, because that was his persona, and I think his on-screen persona was pretty much the same as his off-screen persona. He was the butt of jokes, by not just Eddie Murphy, but by so many comedians, professional and unprofessional alike, and who were familiar with the show, and they made fun of him because of that. But as I said, for little kids aged 2 to 5, he was their guru. He was quietly teaching them life lessons about kindness, tolerance, acceptance, and being yourself, no matter who you are. And what made him, this is what I learned from the movie, what made him so special a person and so good a person, was he was the same way off screen. There was one thing he did, and this is in the movie, that there were reports in the news about a white man who was pouring chemicals into a swimming pool because there were black people swimming in the pool and he didn't want the blacks there. And when he saw that, he created a character called Officer Clemens, who was an African-American policeman and who worked in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And there's a scene, and it's in the movie, where it's very hot, and Mr. Rogers has got his shoes off, and he's got his feet in a kiddie pool, and he's sort of washing his feet down, cooling his feet down with a hose, cold water hose. And Officer Clemens comes by, and he invites him to come sit with him and put his feet in the pool and cool his feet down. And I mean, it was so simple. It was so genius to say, here, two grown men basically in the pool together, and the world is still, revolving on its axis. Brilliant idea. And I'm sure that, segregationists and racists were quite upset about this image, but for kids, they loved it because it was wholesome, and it was true, and it was honest, and it was loving. It was wonderful, and parents of these kids loved it too. So I think great. But what made this incident even more special, as you'll see in the movie, is the actor who played Officer Clemens. His name is Francois Clemens, still alive, as far as I know, he's still alive. He talks about his off-screen relationship with Fred Rogers, and how Fred really was the real deal, both on-screen and on-screen. What he preached on-screen, he preached off-screen too, and that was a very touching part of the movie. And to his credit, and again, this I didn't know until I watched the movie, he talked about death, he talked about divorce, he talked about assassination. Following the assassination of Bobby Kennedy in 1968, he talked about assassination. He even talked about 9/11 after it happened, because this was happening to kids and they didn't know how to deal with it. So he acknowledged the children's concerns and their fears, and he talked to them, as I said, in words and a tone that they would understand. And he reminded them, this was his thing, he said, look for the helpers. And these are the people out there who help make the world a better place for all. I mean, beautiful. So beautiful. I mean, amazing story. And, watching the film, you can see the director, he's, well, I don't want to say every director, but, good directors have an agenda when they make a movie, and they have a point of view, and you can see this director is sort of saying, well, look at the current discourse, the current state of a political discourse in America, not to mention who's in the Oval Office, and compare him to Fred Rogers. Interesting, though, Fred Rogers was a lifelong Republican. So, but it would be, the question begs, would he be a Republican today? And of course, we'll never know because he passed away. But he was a man of conviction, strong conviction, always trying to bring people together, always trying to, preach love and harmony and acceptance. I think if he were around today, he'd be trying to get both sides to talk to each other, but more importantly, behave like good neighbors. And I think that's what's missing today, is people are forgetting how to be good neighbors. So that's called Won't You Be My Neighbor. As I said, it's available on streaming services. Fabulous documentary. It wasn't my favorite documentary of 2018, but it was certainly up there. And certainly up there in the, I'd say, top 15 movies that I saw last year in Hong Kong. So really, really good. All right. Now there's 2 films that are opening in Hong Kong this week, 2 big films that are opening in Hong Kong this week. The first is Green Book, which won a couple Golden Globes the other day. I saw it a few weeks back in Macau, and now it's finally opening here. It's getting a lot of press, both good and bad, and I get it. I understand why, and I'm going to talk about that. Amazingly, first of all, it's directed by Peter Farrelly. He's the guy. He and his brother, they did the wonderfully crass film called There's Something About Mary. I mean, gross humor, but great film. He did Dumb and Dumber. Not my favorite film, but look, made a lot of money. And this is a very serious film. It's got some light moments. It's highly enjoyable, but it's a completely different direction. So, kudos for him for taking on this film and doing a good job. So the Green Book tells the little-known story of concert pianist and composer Dr. Donald Shirley, played by Mahershala Ali, who was in Moonlight, won an Oscar for Moonlight, fabulous, and he was in Hidden Figures, and his relationship with his driver and his bodyguard, Tony Lip Vallelonga, played by Viggo Mortensen, who people would know from The Lord of the Rings, and fabulous performance in Eastern Promises, where he plays a Russian mafioso. And the 2 meet back in 1962 when Dr. Shirley decides to embark on an 8-week tour of the southern U.S. Now, again, younger generations might not know this, or people in Hong Kong might not know this. As a black man in what was called the Jim Crow South, traveling alone was a dangerous proposition. And, he would have been killed if he would be left alone. So the record company insisted that he hire someone who could protect him. And true, and this comes out of the movie, in 1956, Nat King Cole, the famous Nat King Cole, had been assaulted while on stage while performing to an all-white audience in Birmingham, Alabama. So not a lot had changed from 1956 to 1962. So this is why Dr. Shirley hired Tony Vallelonga to accompany him, to drive him and make sure he was safe. Now, the very interesting thing is that the 2 of them are like chalk and cheese. Tony's a bouncer at the Copacabana nightclub in New York City. He's got a no-nonsense reputation, which is why he was hired. And Dr. Shirley is very, upright and prim and proper, and erudite. So it's like the Odd Couple basically. And Tony hates blacks. He's racist, but it wasn't so much that he was Donald Trump racist. He was ignorant racist. So not that makes it any better, but there's hope for people like that when it comes from ignorance. And Dr. Shirley hates ignorance, but they need each other more than they hate each other. So they agree to set their differences aside and as best they can, And as the pair get to know each other, they deal with racism and intolerance that's endemic in the South, and they begin to form a friendship, and that friendship continued on for 50 years. True story. Continued on for 50 years until I think Dr. Shirley died first. They died very close to each other. But I think Dr. Shirley died first. So now, why are people complaining about this film? Sounds like a wonderful film. Well, first of all, we can call it Driving Dr. Shirley. We can call it My Fair Tony, or The Odd Couple. This is a buddy road trip, but I understand why many African American people and some white people as well, they're upset because this is yet one more film about a black person as being seen through the eyes of a white person. The screenplay was written by Tony's son. I can't remember what the fellow's name is, but also Vallelonga. Nick Vallelonga, the son, he wrote the script. So it's, the point of view is Tony's point of view. And people are upset. And I get it. I understand that. And what we see is, Tony's circle, except for his wife, because apparently the wife wasn't like this, but Tony's family and friends, they're all racist. They all hate blacks, again from ignorance. But they seem to lose that far too easily. And there's things that Tony teaches Dr. Shirley, why aren't you eating fried chicken? And he says, you should be eating. He teaches them how to eat fried chicken and things like this. It's not great. It's in that respect, as I said, I understand why people are upset about it, but I look at it this way. I take a more pragmatic approach. If this film encourages people to go onto Wikipedia at the very least and research Dr. Shirley, learn who he was, go in and buy his albums and listen to his music, and maybe learn something about the Jim Crow South, then I think the film has done a service. I think about Schindler's List, which many people, the majority of people who saw it love it, but there are people who are critical of it because of its problematic Christian savior imagery. Look, Schindler's List continues to educate people around the world about the Holocaust and tolerance. 25 years later, it's the 25th anniversary. It led to the USC Shoah Foundation. So it's done more good than harm. And I think this film also will do more good than harm. So I'm okay with this film being not perfect, and also it's a good film, it's an enjoyable film. The performances are fantastic. Both Mahershala Ali and Viggo Mortensen, their performances are fantastic. I think they both won Golden Globes the other day, but certainly Viggo Mortensen's performance is Oscar worthy. I think he's going to take home the Oscar. Forget about Rami Malek. I think Viggo will win the Oscar for Best Actor. This is the best I've ever seen him, and I always liked him. I think he's a fabulous actor, but this is the most animated he's ever been on screen. He apparently gained a whopping 45 pounds for this role because Tony loved to eat, whether it was a whole pizza pie folded in half, love that, like a newspaper, or a whole greasy bucket of fried chicken. This guy loved to eat, and he lived life large, and I think Viggo Mortensen really embrace the character. So it was good. So as I said, you know what? A little bit problematic. Okay, I accept it. Wonderful performances though, well made. Really an enjoyable film. It's in my top 10 films for 2018. Not number one, but number one's going to come in a couple weeks to Hong Kong. But this one's certainly way up there. I really enjoyed this film. So this is called Green Book. Finally opens today in Hong Kong. Definitely, you should go see it. Finally, and I've been talking again too long today. So finally is another film that's opening today, other big film that's opening today, Creed 2. And Creed 2, again, it's very fun. we're very late to get Creed 2. It opened in America in November. It's played all over the world. It's finally coming here. And I asked the distributor, Warner Brothers, why are we getting it so late? And apparently, well, I mean, I know the reason. I'm not going to say live what the real reason is, but it's a financial reason. Creed 1 did not do well here in Hong Kong. This is not a subject, I'm going to choose my words very carefully here, that interests local Hong Kong people. So they really did not, apparently they didn't want to release Creed 2 here in Hong Kong. There was no plan, but it was getting good reviews, and then they decided, okay, they'll release it. So that's why we're getting it so late here. So I saw it, what's today, Friday. I saw it Wednesday night, and it opened yesterday in Hong Kong. Good film, but not as good as Creed 1. So the story, that's my opinion. And the reason is, I think rather than being called Creed 2, it should have been called Rocky 4 2, because it more closely resembles Rocky 4, which was Rocky's most successful film, although it was critically derided. But did extremely well at the box office. So it more closely resembles Rocky 4 than it does the first Creed film. Of course, it's got the characters from Creed, but the story is Rocky 4. It's basically an update of Rocky 4 with these characters. So in this film, Creed 2, all the main characters, everybody's back, and they all have nicknames for each other, apparently. Donnie, who's Michael B. Jordan's character, he's from, his real name is Adonis Creed. He goes by Donnie, but now everybody calls him D, or at least his girlfriend calls him D. Tessa Thompson's character, Bianca, she calls him D, and he calls her B. So there's D and B, and they both call Rocky Sylvester Stallone Rock or Unk. So everybody's got a nickname now, They're all very friendly with each other. They all got nicknames. Thankfully, Donnie's adoptive mother, Mary Ann, played by Felicia, the lovely, resplendent. She's amazing. Felicia Rashad, that everybody of a certain age will know from TV's The Cosby Show. I just want to do an aside here. I read this yesterday. Apparently, when she married Ahmad Rashad back in the 80s, I think it was in the 80s she married him, Bill Cosby walked her down the aisle, and O.J. Simpson was the best man. I mean, I get it because Ahmad Rashad played football, but wow, isn't that freaky that the two of them were at her wedding, which, by the way, ended in divorce. But anyhow, so thankfully, Mary Ann is still called Mary Ann, or she's called Mom by D, Donnie. So she doesn't have a nickname, but everybody else has a nickname. And familiarity and family are really very much the themes of this film. With the return of that Russian monolith, Ivan Drago, played by Dolph Lundgren, who we just saw in Aquaman. He's back. We haven't seen him in so many years. Now he's back. 2 films in short order. And apparently the story is that following Drago's loss to Rocky back in 1985 with Rocky 4, he fell on hard times. His wife, Ludmilla, played by Brigitte Nielsen, who is the ex-Mrs. Stallone, she walked out on him after the fight, and she left him to raise their son, Victor, all alone. And so Ivan's got a grudge to bear. He's been letting this simmer for 30-odd years. And what he's done is he's kept busy all this time training this young man who's played by German boxer Florian Munteanu. Munteanu. It's a Romanian name. Munteanu, right. Florian Munteanu. He goes by the moniker Big Nasty. So he's been training him to one day seek revenge upon who? Not Rocky's son. You think it would be Rocky, because it would be Rocky was the one that he lost to, and he's got grudge to bear. So you'd think he'd want to go after Rocky's son Robert, but Robert doesn't box. So he wants revenge from Donnie, the son of the man whose father he pummeled to death 33 years earlier. Go figure. So what happens is, much like in Rocky IV, Rocky has reservations over whether the young Creed should be facing off in the ring against the young Drago. And much like in Rocky IV, this Creed doesn't take advice from Rocky either. And he gets into the ring, and although he doesn't die, no spoilers, that's not a spoiler, he doesn't die. So although he doesn't die like his father did 33 years earlier, he does get a severe whooping, and it lands him in the hospital, but it only gives him more resolve to agree to a rematch against Drago, the young Drago. And where's it going to take place? Well, just like Rocky IV, it's going to take place in Russia. And, I get that connection. Obviously it's going to take place in Russia. But this time, Creed is the world champion. He doesn't have to, he should have said, hey, I'm the world champion. I don't want it in Russia. We can go to a third country. We can go to Manila. We can go to, Kinshasa or Kampala or wherever in Kenya Ali fought. We don't have to go to Russia. But anyhow, they had it in Russia. Now, unlike his father, now Donnie knows why he needs to fight Drago, and this is how he's gonna beat this guy, because the first time he fought him, he didn't have a reason for fighting him. Now he knows, and the reason is the love that he has and the love that Bianca and Marianne have for him. And it's this love of family that carries him through to the final punch. Now, as I said, this story very closely resembles Rocky IV. So there aren't a lot of surprises here to the story. The surprises really come from the cameos, both inside and outside the ring. I'm not going to tell you who the cameos are, but, they're good for a few laughs and surprises, so it's good. But you know what? Just like the first Creed, these are very likable characters. Even with their insecurities and their foibles, you like them, you feel you know them, you understand them. And even the elder Drago, he's very sympathetic in his own way. I mean, he's a driven man. He's got a lot of hatred in his heart, but you understand why he feels that way. And there's a scene that really makes you really get him, and that's to the writer's credit. I think Sylvester Stallone had something to do with the writing. He was one of the writers, or maybe they gave him a writing credit because these are his characters. That could be just it. So the writing of the characterization, the characters are very well developed, and that's really a testament to the quality of the film. But where the film really soars are these impeccably choreographed fight scenes. They will make you bob and weave, and with the boxers, and you're going to wince every time a punch lands on target. I mean, they're really, really well choreographed. I complain about fight choreography with other films. This one, 10 out of 10 for fight choreography. And the training montages, of course you have to have a training montage because it's a Rocky film. They're good, but they're not as good as the Rocky montages. I was thinking as I was watching it, I mean, how many people, even today, still, so they start their day with a drink of a half a dozen raw eggs, or how many people, when they're in Philadelphia, run up the steps, those 72 steps in front of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And even in the film, they're showing, people, they probably just set a camera up, and they're showing tourists running up the stairs and, doing this. And you know what? That's how memorable those training montages of Rocky are, 35, 40 years ago that he did it, and people are still doing it today. So I thought the training montages were good here, but they weren't as good as those ones. So, but I'll tell you something, in terms of what these young actors, Michael B. Jordan and the boxer, Florian Munteanu, they worked really hard off screen. Apparently in an interview, Munteanu said he had to lose 20 pounds for the role, and Jordan had to gain 20 pounds. And I mean, you see it. Munteanu's a big guy, and you think, how's Creed going to beat this guy? I mean, this guy is solid. But by the time the two enter the ring for the rematch, they're both solid muscle. I mean, it's incredible. But Munteanu he's a much bigger guy. I mean, he's a fighter. He's not an actor. He's a fighter, whereas Michael B. Jordan's an actor. who's playing a fighter. So I mean, it's different. But the two of them worked really hard to train for their role. So full respect for that. So all in all, this is a very exciting film. It's entertaining, not as good as the first Creed film, but you know what? Not bad. I generally enjoyed it, so I say go see it. Now, I've been talking for a half hour. I said I wasn't going to do it. So that's it. Have a great week. Sun is shining. Not sure what I'm doing next week again. Don't know, but we'll see. Have a good week. Bye.